Hey everyone, welcome to Conversations with Curtis. Today, my guest is David Fox. David is a multimedia producer who designed and programmed numerous early LucasArts games, including Rescue on Fractalus, Labyrinth, MCKRAKEN, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, MANIAC Mansion, and he is currently the lead programmer on the about-to-be-released Return to Monkey Island. Had a really fun conversation with him. We are not able to talk about Return to Monkey Island quite yet, but he did agree to maybe come back once the game is about to be released or when he's in a position to be able to talk more about it. But we had a great conversation about his early years, about video gaming in general, and I think you'll enjoy it. In the meantime, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please follow us on Twitter and join our Discord community. And if you are in a position to do so, please consider joining our Patreon family. I can't say this enough, but there's no way we can continue this project without our Patreon members. And I am grateful for every one of you. And we could always use a few more. So think about it. And if you can afford it, please consider joining. All right, without further ado, please enjoy my interview with David Fox. David Fox, welcome to Conversations with Curtis. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I feel like we pulled a fast one on you. My partner, Daniel, reached out to you over Twitter. And I think in my research of you, you've been very, very kind over the years in granting interviews with podcasters of all sorts. It must be it's a really kind thing that you do to talk to folks about this stuff.
Thanks. Well, I think I missed having any of this happen back in the day when we were actually redoing the games at Lucasfilm. We were mostly hidden away, in Skywalker Ranch or in our fortress or whatever, and there was no social media back then, so the opportunity just rarely would get like some newspaper person would come up or a magazine person to do an interview right before a launch.
Was it surprising to you and at what point did you realize the effect that your work was having on people and how many people and how around the world it has been?
I know exactly when. I was invited to a conference in 2004 to Oslo, and it was like actually there were two that year. One was in Oslo, one was in Helsinki, and one was Assembly. The other was the Gathering. And they're like massive at the time they were like network people doing network or LAN games. This huge stadium, like hundreds and hundreds of people with their computers set up, but also got to give some talks. And one of the people showed me his Nokia phone with a little color screen and a tiny little joystick on it, and it was running MCKRAKEN. And I said, "What?" And I hadn't heard about ScumVM,
okay.
And so I didn't really know that. Maybe peripherally I knew a little bit about it, but not to that degree. And we had always assumed when we made the games that they'd be around for 2 or 3 years until the hardware was tossed because it became antiquated and people didn't want to keep their Commodore 64s.
So you never thought that these would have a lifespan beyond just sort of the few years that you were.
It's like kind of picture, okay, whatever audience we get now is going to be it, and then they'll go away. And the internet at the time we were doing, there was no World Wide Web. That happened a few years afterwards. There wasn't internet when we used email and connections there, but there was no coherent use at the time. So seeing that and then realizing giving a talk to people who weren't even alive at the time we made the games. And it's like they knew the games that we were doing in the talks. And it was just, so that was really my first exposure. And this is kind of before really social media took off. In 2004. So and this is before the iPhone. So then it just kept on building once we had social media and
It's a humbling thing, isn't it, to know that you've done that, this work that you've been doing, like you said, sort of holed up in your little area with your group of collaborators has had such a tremendous effect on so many people. And by the way, I noticed your sweatshirt. You're giving away a little something that we can't talk too much about today.
Yeah, this is old. This is I found this. I'm wearing this for you specifically, but this was from the back of my closet, and it's from the first Monkey Island game, Secret of Monkey Island.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I've got a number of questions for you. The first thing that comes to mind is in doing my research on you, I see that you are from Marin County originally. Is that right?
Well, it's where I live now. I'm from Los Angeles originally.
Oh, okay. But you live in Marin. I am in Marin right now.
Oh, really?
I'm from Seattle. I'm an actor, and I'm actually at the last week of I'm doing a play at the Marin Theater Company.
Okay.
I'm actually staying at at a hotel not too far away, and it was a co-production with a theater in Seattle. So I'm actually in your neck of the woods. I thought that was fascinating. How long have you been here now?
We could have done an in-person interview.
I know. Had I known.
I grew up in LA and was on path to become an engineer. So I thought I was going to be. I didn't know. I knew I liked electronics and math and science, and ended up going to UCLA and getting that, as an engineering major, and just hated it. And after the first year or so, I think I tried checking out different things. I ended up coming up to Sonoma, which is north of here, to Sonoma State College or University of whatever it's called now, Sonoma State University, for a humanistic psychology program, which is like 180 from engineering.
Right.
And just fell in love with the Bay Area and just stayed here. And,
excellent. Well, this is a great. I want to, before I get you into that, because I've got this series of questions, and part of my questions are going to cover what I want to make sure we don't repeat ourselves. So, what I've done with most of my guests is I will have them tell their whole life story in 3 minutes or less, just as a kind of a fun way to kind of go through things. But that said, I've done it a few times, and I'm making some changes. So I'm going to expand it to 5 minutes. And instead of having you tell the story, I am going to ask you a series of questions. And these are meant to just be kind of quick responses. We'll get into more of a conversation in a few minutes. But this is just a fun way to kind of get to know you a little bit. And before we move forward, I just do want to let our viewers know that one of the caveats of our interview today is that we can't speak or talk in any real detail about the new Return to Monkey Island. We know that we can't talk about that. We will talk about what we can't talk about a little bit later, and maybe you can give us a little bit of a insight as to where things are. But this is going to be more just about your career creating these games that people have loved for years. But let's start with this little timer. I'm going to start a timer, and you just jump on in with anything that the first thing that pops into your mind. Are you ready?
All right. Mm-hmm.
All right. Where were you born?
Los Angeles.
Where did you grow up?
Los Angeles.
What was the name of your neighborhood in Los Angeles?
It was kind of Mar Vista, Palms, West LA.
Okay.
But that area.
Gotcha.
Santa Monica.
Who are your parents?
Parents were Irene and Aaron, and my mother was a pretty typical 50s housekeeper, and my father had a used car dealership that he co-owned with my uncle.
Wow, cool.
Actually, used truck dealership.
Okay. Do you have siblings?
I have a brother and a sister, and I have another half sister. So I have, I was the oldest. My half sister is like 20 years younger than me. My brother and sister are within 5 years.
Gotcha. And did you guys?
My sister's up in Seattle also.
Oh wow, wonderful, yeah. Wonderful. Did you get along as kids?
Yeah, pretty well.
Okay. You get along now?
Yep.
Good. Where did you go to elementary school?
Mar Vista.
Mar Vista.
Yep.
What were you like as a kid?
I was quiet, probably shy, probably would have been a geek if they had that word back then.
Right.
I played trombone from elementary school up through high school. So probably, I guess you could say I was a band geek.
Yeah. Okay, good. What were two of your childhood obsessions?
Mm. Photography and kind of still animation, although I didn't do it. Hanna-Barbera Studios was near where I grew up.
Oh, right.
And when I moved to Studio City, and I could bike there and get like I got a stack of cells that they had tossed in their bin from the Flintstones.
Oh, I love
took
the
it home and actually kind of did an animated, try to reassemble them into a stop motion.
Fantastic. That's great. Okay, a couple other things. Let's see. What was the first book you read that blew your mind?
Ooh. I'm thinking maybe Stranger in a Strange Land.
Oh yeah, I remember that too. Yeah, I can see why. What was the first movie you saw in a movie theater that blew your mind?
I guess I'm going to Dr. No,
Ooh,
James Bond,
James
which
Bond. Yeah. Okay.
that was unexpected since it was a double feature, and that was like the lesser of the two films, I thought, but it turned out to be the best one.
Yeah, that's great. I remember double feature. That's right.
Yeah.
Where did you go to high school?
I started, no, actually, I went to Hollywood High School for the whole time. Yeah, 3 years.
Oh wow. Okay.
Mhm.
What were you popular?
I don't think I was popular. I managed to fit into the middle crowd, so I wasn't I was like on student council, and I got good grades, and people seem to like me. For my yearbooks, it looks like people like me, but I was the one time I went to a dance, I brought a young woman, a girl with me, and everyone assumed she was my cousin. So it's like, could you possibly be doing anything
They
like
couldn't.
that?
They couldn't believe that you actually had a date.
Right.
What was the first music concert you went to?
Um, I think it was the Doors.
Oh, that's a
Hollywood
great
Bowl.
first concert.
Hollywood Bowl. I had a friend who worked backstage, or like one of the head of ushers at the Hollywood Bowl, and he would let us in a couple of times.
That's awesome.
So the Doors and Simon and Garfunkel were the first two.
Oh man, those are two great ones. Mine was
Very
was
different.
Fleetwood Mac, so not quite a
Ooh,
pretty good.
yeah.
What was what was your favorite video arcade game as a teenager?
Well, that's easy since we didn't have them.
Or I guess what was your when?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the first, at the time it was really pinball and mechanical stuff.
Yeah.
And there was some kind of I think it was a submarine battleship type thing, but it was all done with moving lights and mechanics because we didn't have electronics for games.
Right, gotcha.
And so, I like going to the arcade, but we didn't do it a whole lot.
Okay. What was the first computer you owned?
First one I owned, well, Annie and my wife and I started a nonprofit public access computer center in 1977.
Oh my.
And so we ended up owning, as part of the center, 9 processor technology Sol 20s and 1 Equibox. And people would come in and rent time on the computers for like $1.50 an hour. And we teach programming classes, and we'd have lots of games they could play on them. Then that expanded to like 40 computers, including O2s, a Radio Shack, a TR-80, PET, Commodore PET, and a bunch of Ataris, 800s and 400s.
Wonderful. What was the first computer game you ever played?
Colossal Cave, possibly. When I was doing research for the computer center, someone, I think a local school, loaned me a Texas Instruments portable terminal that was a paper terminal, printed heat sensitive paper. So it's like a teletype. So it was a modem. I could call into their mini computer and play text games on paper. So that one, and probably a few others that were like, Hunt the Wumpus or things that were not really video games. The very first one I ever really played that I remember was on a field trip when I was in college to Stanford Research Institute. And they had Space Wars playing on a T, and no sound. I think just two little triangles that you could move around with
I remember.
arrow keys. And I think that was like a watershed moment for me. It blew my mind, and I just had this thought that this is so cool. I want to do something like this.
Wow, that's great. So that was one of those moments,
That was
right?
the
That was
moment. That was
yeah.
1971 or 72.
Gotcha. And you mentioned, tell me about your college. You had mentioned Sonoma and Stanford. Where did you end up going to college? Is those two schools?
So first it was UCLA, and then for 2 years at UCLA, then finished at Sonoma State.
Okay.
And that's where, and then Stanford Research was a field trip. That was
okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. And what did you ultimately get your degree in?
Humanistic psychology. I was a bachelor's.
Love it.
Yeah.
Were you a good student?
I was probably like a straight B plus in high school, and then and that was pretty much less. And then it just ran into a wall of bricks at UCLA where I actually had to read books and study and just like, holy shit, what's going on here?
Right.
It kind of was a huge eye opener, because I thought that I was a much better student than I was.
Funny, I had the same experience. I spent 2 quarters at UCLA right out of high school, and it was too much. I couldn't take it. I had to take a break. I just wasn't mentally prepared, and had to. I went to Europe for 6 months and just sort of got my mind straight, and then came back.
For me, Sonoma was much more of a hippie school, and it was much more casual. And there was some pass-fail grade classes I could take, and classes like the psychology of dreaming, and I took improv class and mime class, and things that were just much more creative. And I just really got to stretch out.
This is great. So I'm down just a few more questions here, and we'll kind of just ease into. There's so much that there's so much fodder here. What was your first job out of college?
Out of college, I was a sales trainee at Panasonic for about 3 months.
Okay.
In Union City, and realized that wasn't where I was going to end up.
And you mentioned that you're married, you and Annie, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And you've been married for how long?
We were married in August 74. So we're going to hit, what is that, 48?
Geez, that's wonderful. Yeah, good. Kids?
Have 2 kids. They're both in the Bay Area, and 2 grandkids.
Wonderful. Wonderful. What's the last video game you played?
Other than the one I'm working on. I actually, as part of the research for this, I replayed Monkey Island 1 and 2. So I guess that would count.
Oh, that does count. That's great. I want to hear about that. And then last 2 questions. What was the last to-do item you checked off your work list?
Probably top secret.
Okay, good. What was the last to-do item checked off of your home list?
Home list. It was probably vacuum. Vacuum the downstairs.
Hey, that's great. So those are my 25 questions. Thank you for being so game to go for them. It's just a fun way to get a snapshot of a person in we have such a short time to talk together. So I think for me, it's just a great sort of, icebreaker. So thanks for that. As I mentioned to you, I feel like this is a blind date. I have this teeny corner of the gaming world that I stumbled into 25 years ago. So I got hired I'm an actor by trade, and I do a lot of educational work and things like that, which I want to talk to you about yours. But back in 1996, I got cast as the lead in Sierra Online's FMV game Phantasmagoria 2. And it was a really interesting experience. the game and that particular genre of game didn't last very long. And it kind of, and it never really affected my career one way or the other. So I just moved on, never thought quite about it. And like you, over the years, especially as the internet took off and YouTube and game players and live games, this game has found this cult following. It's just, it's, you know, it's a small but worldwide following of people that really love this game. And so people have reached out to me. And finally last year, I realized it was the 25th anniversary. I ended up doing a deep dive, talked to a lot of the people who made the game, got their memories. We did sort of a oral history project. And that has led to chatting to other people from the Sierra world. And then now that's leading to more people like yourself. So I'd love to just dive in a little bit about, you know, about your time at LucasArts. And I also love to know, you know, I'm curious if back during that time, if there was a healthy or an unhealthy rivalry between LucasArts and Sierra, or what all that was like. But before we get into that, I just, what was it that got you hooked on making video games, and what made you think that you could create them? When you watched that Space Wars, what was it that made you go, I can do that?
Well, it was just like this quantum leap from all the games I had seen before, which were the mechanical ones. And so this is before Pong. This is before you saw commercial games. So that was just, wow. After college, and after Panasonic, I did some training and was actually a counselor for a few years. And, you know, not through the formal stuff, like much more new agey kind of stuff. And after doing that for a few years, I had the thought that I just wonder if there's a way to reach more people than you could reach in one counseling sessions, like maybe by taking interactive like games and have built-in lessons of some sort, not, you know, not preachy stuff, but where you, by going through the experience, you change in some way, you know, much in the way that, you know, some movies can change you. I feel like Star Wars changed me in some way. And started imagining interactive theme parks where you'd have like, you know, on the scale of a Disneyland, instead of attractions that were always exactly the same, where, you know, it would be, you know, it was like VR, but this is before VR. So it's like your choices would have a difference. You'd come out changed in some way, hopefully in a better way. And you know, start thinking of that, and also thinking of lucid dreams, where you might have a dream where you become aware that you're dreaming and do something empowering in the dream, which that feeling when that's happened to me carries over into real life. Like, wow, I actually felt like I did something, I chose something and I did it. And being able to take that experience into the real world. And so knowing I knew nothing about computer games really at the time, that's where we thought about doing the computer center as a way to learn about programming, computers, games, education, and, you know, figure when interactive amusement parks would arrive 10 years later, we would be prepared for that. So, you know, through the process of doing the computer center, which was based in Marin County, and so was Lucasfilm, there was some overlap in a couple places where, you know, we would connect. Like, we had members. There's one member in particular who worked at Industrial Light and Magic, and I was writing some books and with a friend of mine, Mitchell Waite, and one of the second book I did with him was on computer animation. And that gave me a reason to talk to the Lucasfilm computer division and go there and visit and see what they were doing, state-of-the-art high graphics. And then I did my part of the book on doing animation on the Atari 800. And around the time we finished the book, that friend from Industrial Light and Magic, Gary, said that they were starting a new games group at Lucasfilm. And I was like, I had, when I saw Star Wars, I mean, my initial reaction is like, I want to be in that movie. I want to be in that universe.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the idea of knowing that Lucasfilm was right there, and that, yeah, maybe this is my way of kind of being involved in that creative process in some
Yeah.
way.
And is
So
it
I
true
did that.
you were one of the first, one of the first three
Yeah,
or four people that
I
were?
was the third hire. So the first one was Peter Langston, who became our manager. I think I was probably one of the first people he interviewed. And um, one guy came over from another group within the computer division, so that'd be number two. Then I was the third one hired. So
Yeah,
I was there at the very beginning when
right.
it was just a group.
Well, you talk about Star Wars, and I remember seeing that too when it first came out, and being just as, like everybody, it was just unlike anything we had seen before. But it's funny, it didn't. I didn't have the same connection to it that so many people did. I loved it, but it wasn't, it didn't kind of. But I do remember, and this is kind of, I really want to talk to you about this, is when I was a kid, you asked about the movie that you had seen that blew you away. It reminded me of, I was a big movie buff, and a good buddy of mine and I would go see, we were so on top of all the new releases that we had seen everything. So we were just waiting every Friday for the next batch to come out. So we were just impatient and ready to go. And so one day my friend said, "Hey, there's a sneak preview of some movie playing. We don't even know what it is, but I got tickets for it. Do you want to go?" And we're like, "Sure." We had nothing else to see. So we go, we sit down, and there's truly no context. I had no idea what it was, what we were in for. And it was Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Mm.
And as an 18-year-old, or I don't know how old I was when it came out, sitting near the front row and watching that opening scene, with and having no context, having not read any reviews, not knowing who the director was, not knowing anything, just having this pure experience was one of the most mind-blowing experiences I'd ever had. And so it's very exciting to me that you were able to work on the Indiana Jones game. And I would love to know, having watched some of your previous interviews, I know that you did have some interactions with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, and I'm curious if you can tell me a little bit about how that came about and what you did on those, and how that. If you can tell me anything about those games.
Yeah, well, during the 80s, we were not allowed to do any Star Wars games because the rights had already been sold to other companies for both arcade and for home. So those are off the table.
That must have been that disappointment for you.
It was hugely because my first game was intended to be a Star Wars game, and that was the Rescue on Fractulus, which is a first-person flight game.
Right.
And I wanted to be flying. This is my way. I could finally fly an X-wing.
Yeah, you were creating creating that from the point of view of the pilot of the X-wing, right? Yeah,
right. And then when I found out that, sorry, nope, you can't. That was devastating. It took me a little while to get over that and realize I had to regroup, and still kept the game more or less the same, but it was outside. It was in a different universe. So the Labyrinth was the first game that first movie that they let us do a game based on. It was a Lucasfilm production, and I think it was kind of an experiment to see whether we could do it. And maybe because it wasn't the family jewels, they felt like
it was something they could go, okay, this had some success, but we'll let you play with this one first, right? Yeah.
And I guess that proved out that we did a good job. And then so when Last Crusade came up, there was that opportunity to do that again. By then we had already done 2 Scum games, 2 graphic adventures other than Labyrinth, so that was Maniac Mansion and MCKRAKEN. And it's okay. Indy's coming out in 9 months. Can we do a graphic adventure? Can we do a game? And we have the Scum system, we have the experience, but we don't have enough time, because usually it would take us more like a year to year and a half, I think, to from design through completion. And we didn't have that. We had maybe 8 months.
Oh, wow.
So we ended up bringing 3 project leaders together, myself, Noah Falstein, and Ron Gilbert. And we all jumped on as kind of co-designers, co-programmers, and co-project leaders, and didn't get it out in time for the release, but got it out like within a month or 2 after. And it still was close enough, considering that the movie was probably in theaters for half a year or something.
Right.
And we knew that there were issues if we were kind of managing the third parties that had the rights to do Star Wars games. Like they would come to us and we would say yes or no, or here's some issues. And we knew that there were issues about like killing off main characters. And so the first question we had when we had this, maybe half-hour meeting with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and this was like I remember it being a very casual meeting. We're kind of like sitting around a couch. We weren't even sitting down in a meeting room or anything. And ask them, can we kill Indy? Can we change the story? Can we take them to places that weren't in the movie? Can we have things happen that were, that we make up ourselves? And the answer to all that was, yeah, do what you want, pretty much. So it was like,
were you expecting more pushback?
Yeah, we did. We already had a kind of a philosophy very different than Sierra's, that you don't kill your character in a game unless it's like, at that point, unless it was like greatly telegraphed.
Yeah.
Here's a nuclear reactor, don't push this button. And if you push the button, you better save the game first.
Yeah.
Whereas in Sierra, the philosophy seemed to be, how many times can we kill you by doing things that
you have no clue that was going to do that in the first place, right?
Right. So, they said, yeah, you can. So we knew we were going to do it in the way that in our style, but
gotcha. Right.
That meant that there was a couple ways, or was it just one way that he could die? And then I think
what did you learn from that? Their ability, or for them, it would have been, I think the power of saying no is an easy out, and they had that ability to just say no, stick with what we got. But they said to you, go for it. I mean, did you learn something along the way as someone who ultimately, when people came to you for your opinions on things, was that something that
yeah, maybe in retrospect, I mean, there was clearly a huge amount of trust that they were putting in us, that we would keep the feeling of Indy the way it was, that we would honor the character, that we wouldn't try to make him do things that were different. And by this point, we had 2 movies that had come out plus the script of the 3rd movie, so we knew his character, or at least we thought we did. And so I felt we could bring our level of irreverence into it, for the games we did, but also stay true to his character.
Is there a moment in the game, and are you, it seems to me you wear so many different hats. Were you also involved in the creating of the storyline itself, and the sort of, I guess, just plot and story and all that?
In this case, we had the story overall from the script,
right?
So,
but you were able to come up with some new places for them to go and something. Yeah.
So we looked at opportunities. Okay, so here's the Zeppelin. So, hey, it looks like a maze. Okay, let's turn that into a maze and do this with it. And
nice.
And the same thing with the catacombs, and kind of enlarging some of the experience that Indy seemed to breeze through to make it much more puzzle based, and make it more game like. But also, we really didn't want people who had seen the movie to have a big leg up on people who hadn't. So we were trying to keep it so like the movie wouldn't be a spoiler to what you have to do to move along.
Right. That's great.
So they knew they had to get, you probably knew from the movie you had to go through the library into the catacombs, but the way you did it was unknown. And so that was in the game.
Cool. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that with me. So in terms of, we got so many things. I want to just a couple questions about your time at Lucas. What was the game that you worked on or that you designed that you're most proud of during that time?
I would say probably Zach McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders, and that was probably the most personal in terms of what it said. I was the main designer on it. Then I brought in Matthew Kane to help me with the co-design, but it was my story, and it was personal in that I was still like new age and kind of psychic and paranormal things and aliens, and I just was able to. It was this perfect vehicle to throw everything in there.
That's great.
And the humor, the wackiness, it just felt really good. So it was like
when you
really
look back at it now, do you feel like in its own way that it holds up, or do you feel
I
like
think so?
it?
Yeah. I mean, graphically, no.
Yeah, of course, right.
But in terms of the gameplay, and I mean, there are things I would probably do differently now, like fewer mazes and probably more, a lot of scenes that people had to play in their heads through minimal animation could be way better now. There's I still get multiple messages a week saying, when are you going to do his act 2? And
well, that was my next question. I mean, now that you see that there is a real I guess partly the return to Monkey Island might be a really good litmus test, right? Because this seems to be a time where the novelty and the nostalgia of games of yore seem to be finding their way back, and so making newer versions of these types of games might be some doors opening up, right?
Well, there was around the time that right after Disney bought Lucasfilm, we had several meetings to see whether we could get the rights back to some of these games, either get the rights back or get the rights to do new versions of them. And mostly didn't go anywhere. I think there wasn't enough pull. I think out of that, Tim Schafer through Double Fine was able to remaster and redo some of the games they had done before. But I just got redirected to other things. And looking at this now, looking at what is required to do even an indie like game, with a team of about maybe 25 people, it's a pretty massive project. And I really have, if someone were to come to me and say, okay, here's X number of dollars, here's the rights, do it. It would really be a big question. Like, do I want to spend the next 3 or 4 years, 3 years on this game? Or do I want to do, I'm 70, I'm 71. I don't have a lot more time to do these kinds of things. So would I do it? So it would be a question. I don't know what the answer is.
Right. Because and also priorities change too, right? It's there's a you just course you just put a lot of time into a new game that is based on this very popular series from Lucas. But yeah, I hear you. You really, there's a point where back in the day you would, most of us would jump at that, but now there's a lot more to consider.
I mean, I could imagine something where maybe I wasn't the lead. I was there. Other people were doing a lot more of the heavy lifting,
right?
And I was more on the design and the creative consultant. That'd be a lot easier to picture.
Right. That makes sense. That makes sense.
But the other side of that is then you lose control over what happens, and that could be super painful if you don't.
Especially since that was your baby in the first place. Yeah, you'd have to. Yeah.
So I'm not going to say never, and I'm not going to say this is what I'm going after. I'll just see what happens. And
gotcha.
It's not a no.
Yeah. I know that having done, again, as I've been researching you, I know that somebody out there did a fan game of that not too long ago. Is that something that you were?
There were several, especially in Germany. There were 2 or 3 fan-based games that came out. Their sequels are in the same universe. And, that was, I didn't play them because I felt like if it, at the time, if I ever did want to do another game, I don't want to have any influence from those. I wanted to be able to say, to wonder like, or say, I can't do that because someone else did it, or
Right.
having something stick in. I don't want someone to say that, or you just copied the fan game. So I've purposely stayed away from that.
Yeah.
But I'm really honored that people love
Yeah.
the game in the universe that much to do it.
That's so
And
neat.
it's much more niche, I think, than say Monkey Island, smaller following. There weren't sequels to it because I went on to do other stuff. So that also probably limited the exposure that people had.
Right.
But I still, like the characters, I like the story, and it would be fun to see something happen with that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you talked a little bit about one of the differences between Lucas and Sierra was, killing your characters and not, and if you are to kill them, the difference between just randomly doing so and what can you tell me a little bit more about that time frame of when both those companies were really at the height of making these, I mean, you guys were trailblazers. You were doing some incredible things, and it seems like those were the big companies at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so when we ran the computer center, I remember some of the very early games that they had, which were, really, text-based games with a vector drawing on an Apple II. That was the graphic adventure. So you really couldn't move it around. That was Sierra's first foray into adventures. So they had been working with parsers for a really long time. And, I was very much into text adventures back then because we didn't have the space for graphics. Once I started at Lucas, I didn't, and even through today, I'm not a huge gamer, so I don't play a lot of other games. If I do, it's more to get the feeling of how they go.
Right.
I'm really love, intrigued with virtual reality and play more of those more rather than, desktop or phone. But at the time, Sierra had this huge lead in the United States, at least. And I think we saw them as our competitor. I think they probably didn't notice us for years. It's kind of like, we're the biting at the giant's ankle kind of thing.
Right.
And what changed for us was that maybe because it was parser based, they didn't have much of a presence in Europe or in translations. And that was something that because our games had a limited set of verbs, there was no parser. It was much more of a straight translation problem. And our marketing guy, Doug Glenn, saw Europe as a huge opportunity.
Oh, that was good foresight on his part.
Yeah. And I think that might be why our games were way more popular in Europe than I think they were in the US. We didn't have Sierra as a competition there.
Right.
Germany especially, but I think throughout a lot of Europe, people know our games. So when I go to conferences for games, it's always going to be overseas. Related to them here, it's always either been in Italy or Germany or England or whatever.
Right.
Which is fine because I hope to get back to traveling again.
Right, for sure.
And so I think that's a big difference. I think it took a few years I remember they would have a release of a new game and sell 10 times more than we were with our release. And we felt our games were in our style were I think they were better games. I don't know. They're fans that love both of them. They're fans that love one over the other. And it's kind of definitely might be what you played first.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of it has to do with that, the thing that got you hooked, right? And then people, I'm finding, especially in this world that I'm in, that people have such a fun, it is a vital part of who they were at a certain time in their life that they often like to look back on, and I think that you're right. Is there a game, was there ever a Sierra game that you're like, okay, That okay, good for you. You guys, that was a that's that up the bar a little bit.
I think I got turned off with one of the early ones I tried where I kept on dying in ways which I felt weren't fair. So I kept on thinking, that's not fair. I'm picking up a piece of broken mirror that was on the ground and then bleeding out myself. And
Do you remember
so,
what game that was?
I don't.
Okay.
It was pretty early, and it turned me off so much to that feeling. I got the feeling, at least with that one game. Maybe because I'm a coder also, I pictured a coder working at the computer being really sadistic and thinking all the different ways they could trip up the player. And so it felt like it was the designer / programmers against the players.
Yeah.
And the way that I think that we were doing it was more like, let's think of everything that they would try to do creatively and try to get that in the game to make them feel good about themselves if we're exploring.
Well, that's also, it makes sense too, like that if you die in the game, there should be a moment where you go, oh, I know why I did that. I see now. But I think that and again, having just recently played, I'm not a gamer. And so I recently, for the first time ever, played the game that I was in. So, it's an FMV. So I'm watching a 25 year younger me in every scene. And of course, near the end, since the player is me, there are numerous deaths, right? So I remember filming them. I got shot and stabbed and blah, 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 and melted and whatever ways of death that they gave me. And when I finally played it, I did have that moment of like, well, how was I to know? How was I possibly to know that this was it was fun because at this point I don't have anything at stake and I'm not young and trying to get through this, but I can see where it would have been very frustrating for someone who spent their hard-earned money on those games,
But if that's the style, I mean, if that's the language of the game, that you're going to die every 5 minutes or something, then you're constantly saving the game, and I think Ron Gilbert was talking about the whole thing about metagaming, where the game becomes, saving the game, how frequently you have to save the game in order to be able to recover from it. And I think we wanted to do it much more like you were immersed in the experience, and you would, it's fine for you to get stuck. But we didn't want a puzzle. We didn't want any puzzles, if possible, where when you finally got the solution, you thought, there's no way I could have figured that out. Arbitrary adventure puzzles are, I think, the worst. And they should be, if you had a hard time figuring it out and you finally get the solutions, oh, I should have thought of that. Or, oh, my fault for not coming up with that solution. Now it's totally obvious, as opposed to how unfair, that, the person, they came up with something which no sane person would ever figure out.
Right.
So I think that's the philosophy we use in Thimbleweed Park. We want people to be able to get through. When we gave hints, we had a hint book or a hint in Thimbleweed Park. There was a voice in-game hint line where you can call up and get hints.
Yeah.
But it was all done to help the player win at the game. So the hints were all progressive and pushing them like
just a little bit. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. And that's Thimbleweed Park. It was your first. That seems like that was the primer of the same group of people that are producing Return to Monkey Island. So did you have the same role in that game that you have in this one?
No, that was a little different. In Thimbleweed Park, Ron Gilbert and Gary Winnick had the idea. They came up with a story. In some ways, it was similar to how MANIAC Mansion was created, because it was the two of them that came up with the story for that. And then they invited me on to be the scum scripter, the coder, the game coder. And here it's very similar, except in this one, while the basic story was there, a lot of the detail, most of the detail hadn't been worked out. So I came on to help with the design also, and do a lot of brainstorming and figuring out what the puzzles were going to be and how everything was going to work. And then, took on a big chunk of the game to actually code it,
Gotcha.
along with Jen and Ron. I think we're the three of us were the ones who were the game coders. On this one, I'm much more of a programmer.
Okay. Okay, good. All right. Well, I've got, I feel like I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I do have a number of questions but before I get to them, I just had a quick question for you. Like, I'm curious how you feel, at a certain age, we look back at what things used to be and what they are now. And there's always it was better back then feel to a certain extent. I'm curious where you are in the video game world of like, what is better about games today and what do you miss about the older ones? And of course, graphics and it's that of course is.
Well, my favorite games at the time were the ones I was working on, which were like, graphic adventure games. I really didn't work on the original Monkey Island games. I was the director of operations at that point for the first one. So it was much more of a management level. So I saw it more as, more of as a fan would see it and playing it for the first times and play tests and stuff. And of the games that we did, those are my two favorite, probably Secret, both of the first two. And if I played other games during the 90s, they would probably be in that same, genre.
Yeah.
I was never a huge fan of shoot 'em ups. I just didn't have the reflexes, and any game which has me to first person through a walking thing would get me motion sick.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wouldn't do those.
Right. But it's funny how that took off. That became the crack for every, for almost the majority, right?
In VR now, I have a backlog of games I bought during Black Friday and different sales I haven't had a chance to play yet. But I love. That's as close as I came to that vision I had about theme parks and where you feel like you're actually in the game.
Right.
And
I haven't explored much. I went to the Van Gogh exhibit in Seattle, and one of the things they did is they created a virtual reality of basically walking through all of the places that he went to that drew his inspiration. So you're kind of walking through these fields, and then it was a stunning experience. And it wasn't a game, but it was just that was the first time I realized just how creative and immersive that could be. It was really something else.
Yeah, there's a project that I had started before this game, which was the RubeWorks, based on Rube Goldberg's cartoons.
Yeah, I saw a little bit about this.
And we started doing a VR version of it, and got pretty far along. And then all my time is going into what I'm working on now. So that's still kind of inching forward, and hopefully when this is over, that's what I can jump back into. And
I'd love to know more about that. Yeah, that's I saw some of the trailers for what you were doing.
Yeah, well, it is out. It's been out since 2013 on desktop and mobile. But the VR version was kind of like a fun experiment for me to try doing a first VR game, and it's proven more difficult, especially since we were working with 2013 versions of Unity and having to upgrade everything and change things and also rethink how you do it.
Yeah.
So, but it's still fun.
Yeah. One of the questions that people ask, I know that I don't think LucasArts ever did any FMV games, but I'm kind of curious what your take was on, that was a very short-lived time where they were, making films, like, they're using actual actors and placing them in this, and I think it lasted 3 years total, and then finally just didn't, I think they're finding new ways to do it now because it's a little easier to shoot video. But did you have any did you ever check into any of those, and did you have any opinions on what that was like?
I believe Rebel Assault, which when the first Star Wars game was essentially a FMV, but with rendered canyons and things you're flying through. I worked at a company called Rocket Science Games for a year and a half, and their whole reason for being was to try to do full motion video type games on CD, and they had a brilliant group of engineers, like including some of the guys that created QuickTime and the codecs that allowed you to compress video so you could actually stream it off a CD. But the games we were doing were just greatly constricted because of that kind of gameplay. And it was probably, of the games I've done, that's probably the one I did there, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, was probably the least favorite of my games, partly because it was a shooter, and partly because it was so far from the original design I had, because we just didn't have the resources to pull it off the way we wanted to.
Yeah.
But I don't know, after I left, so I left Lucasfilm Games or LucasArts in 1990. Then I was doing location-based entertainment project for 2 years at Lucasfilm. And then I left in 1992. So I was at the company for 10 years.
Yeah.
And my interest after that was much more, theme park level or immersive type of entertainment.
Back to your original, your original inspiration. So let's talk a teeny bit about Monkey Island. I think one of the things to start with that we can talk about is that you said that you ended up playing the first 2 games just to kind of get recently to kind of get a sense. But what do you think? What is it about Monkey Island that continues to be, the hallmark of the point and click? It seems to. I mean, if you go on Twitch, there's somebody always playing that game. That game has just never ever gone out of style. It seems like it has this. What is it about that, and why do you think that it endures?
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, if you look at the history of the games we did leading up to those, where we refined the SCUM engine, the point and click, initially the verb interface, but the irreverence, the humor, the writing, the storytelling, the animation at the time, and also again, the philosophy of really wanting the player to succeed and have that aha moment. I mean, to me, that was always the goal. The games we did was to get the player to be in a situation where they'll figure out the puzzle and have that moment of insight. And I got it.
Yeah.
And that's really, it feels great when you do it, but it also feels, as a designer, that's what we're always like thinking of. Like, we want them to have that. And I think that Ron Gilbert and team did that brilliantly. And then in the second one, they built on it. Came with great characters. It just holds together really well. And I was reading this really good review talking about those games, and there's, the reviewer was saying how there was this quality of a little bit of darkness and a little kind of off-kilter quality to it that just made it more than just a straight cartoon or something. And
is it true that you had a joke that made it into the final game? Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah. There, in the first one, I did participate in at least one of the brainstorming sessions, and there were 3 skulls. Is that what you're thinking of? There are 3 skeletons that are stuck on stakes when you get near the monkey head area, and I just think, oh, shish kebab, what is it? Shish kebab, Shishka Joe, and Shishka Larry or something. And that just stuck. So I think that's what they named them.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So I'm proud of that.
No, that's wonderful. All right, so now let's talk about what we can talk about. So just tell us anything you can about your, Michael, one of our fans says, they think he just sort of sums it up. He says, I don't know how much he can talk about it, but I'm curious what the experience of working on it was like, especially having to work on it in secret for so long,
Yeah,
as
I
well
think,
as I think it being the first video game sequel that you've ever worked on. Is that true?
oh, that's a good question. Um, that is true. I
Yeah, there
hadn't
you
thought
go.
of it in those terms.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess you could say Indiana Jones: Last Crusade was a sequel to a movie, but
right. But that was your
it
first
wasn't
game,
really
though.
the first
Yeah.
game. Yeah.
So yeah,
Um,
tell us what
it,
you can. Just give us a little
well,
little teaser.
yeah, I can give you a couple of things. So we did the movie Park, and that was a huge amount of fun. Working with Ron again and with Gary, and then with Mark Ferrari, who's the one of the main artists on that project. It was all done virtual. We all got used to using Slack and came up with how we did it. And Ron always builds his own engines, so we never use something off the shelf for the engine itself. Then COVID hit, and from my point of view, I knew that Ron was working on something else, and he wasn't telling me what it was, but he said, "How about if we take, we're in lockdown. This is March, April 2020. What if we take the assets from Thimbleweed Park and make this little experimental mini game that we give away free?" And we called it Dolores, based on one of the characters. But this used a new version of the engine, a new engine that Ron had created called Dinky. And we were trying some experiments, and we did it, and it worked well, came out, and we released it, and the source code for the game part of it. So that's online. People can pull it down, play with it, look at it. That really was the core engine, the early version of it that we're using for this new game. And then for me, in August of that year of 2020, Ron finally said, "Okay, I like to tell you about what I'm working on." So I had to do all the NDAs and all that, and it's like super secret. And the only person I was allowed to tell was my wife, and maybe my dog in the back there.
Who I saw in the background earlier.
Yeah, yeah, she was very good about keeping a secret. I mean, the dog, Annie was, my wife was too. But I couldn't tell our kids. And this was like, usually, in the old days, working on something secret, I could share it with my kids or with close family. But here it was like, absolutely no one. And I felt it was a huge constraint, because partly because I was so excited about the project.
Yeah.
I had, finally got to work on one of, in the universe of one of my favorite games. And with the team that we have, I hadn't actually never worked on a game with Dave Grossman, even though, I was one of the people who, I guess, interviewed him and helped to hire him back in the day. He was always, he worked with Ron on those games. I never actually worked with him. So working with him and with Ron, and, Jen also, who's our producer on this. And then the musicians who I knew from back then.
Yeah.
And working with them again. So just that whole thing was great. But I realized when, come April 4th, when the news broke, there's this
After the April 1st, after the April
yeah,
Fool's joke, right?
right. We were, I had scheduled this trip a year ago. We were going to be in Hawaii on April 3rd. And I realized that meant that the news would hit, and while we were on vacation. So I literally spent a lot of the first day on vacation. I actually woke up at 5 a.m. in Hawaii on Monday morning to catch the announcement, and then retweet it and share it. But there was this shield that I had created around my mind that would sense, like a sense, like one of those 8-second delay things, they have on TV or something. So anything that was going to come to my mouth, I had to chop off to make sure that I wasn't saying or doing anything that would spill anything that would be a hint about what we were working on. And to be able to throw that away was so fun. It was like, something just released.
I'll bet.
the part of not sharing anything about the game itself is easy compared to that.
Right. But just being able to say that you're working on, and I know that Gary and Dave both have given a couple of interviews. So they've teased out a little bit about what the story is.
Oh, you say Ron and Dave.
I'm sorry, Ron and Dave. Sorry
Ron
about
and
that.
Dave,
Yeah, I'm Ron and Dave. So we're getting a sense of it. I also know there's been some little bit of pushback in terms of it, that people were outraged that it's not pixel art, but I think you gotta be in the you gotta straddle the line of where we were and where you are, right? You can't just what would you say? I'm sure you've got a chance to play it, or where it's at. How excited are you about how this is gonna go?
Well, I don't going to say too much about that. What I could say is that I'm loving it. It's hard sometimes when you're working on a game to pull back and see it from a distance.
You lose perspective, right? It's hard. For
every
sure.
once in a while I play something and everything just comes together and say, oh wow, this is amazing. Because starting with like we did with Thimbleweed Park, starting with like a wireframe room or like a temporary art room where just put together just to get gameplay compared to how it ends up being. So yeah, I think I probably shouldn't talk too much about that because I might fall into
fair enough. And we've talked already, and maybe at some point once the floodgates are open, we can have you back and maybe even bring in a few of your fellow designers, and we get a chance for you guys to do a little round table and talk about it.
Right. Yeah. So I'm so having a blast. I think we're all having fun working on it, and I'm really happy with the response that I've seen.
That's
the excitement.
Well, I think I don't want to take up any more time. I did have one other thing that kind of came up. This is just a little, it sounds to Jared, one of our fans, he says, and is this true? He says, what was it like he essentially says that you designed the first jump scare in video game history. Do you know what he's referring to?
I do. Yeah. So, and I can't take full credit for that. That was on Rescue on Fractulus.
Yeah.
And
the alien popping in.
Popping up, right. And is actually, I have to give George Lucas a lot of credit for that, since we showed him an early beta, which both didn't have shooting aliens and didn't have, I think it was his idea to say, how about every once in a while that the alien the person running towards you is actually an alien, and maybe he jumps up, and then we took it from there and figure out how to make it happen. And
that's great. Have you had people say to you over the years, like, oh my God, you scared the hell out of me?
Yeah, I really, I still have stories I collect on people's first experience, because the thing that was unusual was that it wasn't telegraphed anywhere.
Just came out of.
We got Atari to agree to not mention it in the marketing, and kind of like, they just agree not to put it anywhere. We had a reference to it in the manual that something happened, but you couldn't really tell what it was. And then for the first, I don't know, was it 8 levels? It doesn't happen. So by that point, the players kind of got into this mechanical rhythm and kind of like, doing this and putting the right keys and doing this. And all of a sudden this thing happens. And it's like, after you've been playing the game for hours, this thing happens. And
you've been lulled, right?
You've been, I don't know if it's betrayal. It's like, you then from that point on, this happened to me too. Even though I knew what the odds were that it would happen, I would feel this slight adrenaline rush every time a pilot would start running towards me, and I'd have to be ready to hit the right key. And you definitely would get a spurt of adrenaline.
That's great.
And it worked really well. So
you started a trend. There's been many jump scares since.
Again, George wanted more attention, and it was his original idea. And he just went with it.
Well, David, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and chatting with me. I really appreciate it. We're going to release this through a YouTube live premiere. I'll let you know when the date is if you want to hop on and maybe say hi in the chat or something like that. But I'll keep you updated on that. But meanwhile, best of luck with the rest of the work on Monkey Island. And I look forward to your next step with the virtual reality of the Rube Goldberg stuff. I think that sounds great.
Great. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Have a great rest of your day. And thanks again for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. So there you go. What a fun interview. He's such a neat guy. What a genuinely sweet and kind person, and thoughtful, and just what a great career he has had and continues to have. It's been really fun talking to these people. I feel a little out of my league sometimes because I'm not a gamer and I don't have all the information, or I don't know, David especially is someone I knew nothing about before my associate Daniel Albu reached out to him. And so when I found out I was going to interview him, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to say? But it turned out to be great. And I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for everything. And as always, please like and subscribe our YouTube channel and all the things. And I hope to see you all sometime soon. All right. Take care. Bye.